These divers have been exploring shipwrecks off the coast for years, but they've never heard of any submarine at this location. Not knowing how old the wreck is or what nationality, they report it to the U.S. Navy.
And I checked some of my sources that I have here of known wrecks off the East Coast, and there was no known wreck at that exact position.
What began with a fisherman's accident now starts these divers on a journey through the dark history of World War II. When they're through, part of the record of the 20th century's worst war will stand corrected. And families around the world will finally learn the truth about their lost loved ones. Their 6-year quest to solve this mystery begins with a startling discovery.
On my second dive, I went down, penetrated inside the wreck, and I brought back 2 bowls.
And on the back of the dish, as plain as day, was the eagle and swastika with the year 1942.
That proved that the wreck was a German U-boat from World War II.
It shouldn't be there. According to the war records, there isn't supposed to be a U-boat for 100 miles in either direction. And that's when the mystery really started.
Major funding for NOVA is provided by the Park Foundation, dedicated to education and quality television.
This program is funded in part by the Northwestern Mutual Foundation. Some people already know Northwestern Mutual can help plan for your children's education. Are you there yet? Northwestern Mutual Financial Network.
Scientific achievement is fueled by the simple desire to make things clear. Sprint PCS is proud to support NOVA.
And by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, and by contributions to your PBS station from viewers like you. Thank you.
In December 1941, German submarines, U-boats, depart on a secret mission. They cross the Atlantic undetected and take up positions a few miles off the East Coast. Their target is the United States.
It was quite risky because we didn't know what anti-submarine warfare had to be expected.
Horst von Schroeter is watch officer on U-123.
We closed the shore within, say, 2 or 3 nautical miles. We smelled the forest ashore, and we saw the autos, the cars running on the shoreway.
The German plan is codenamed Paukenschlag, or drumbeat. It calls for an all-out surprise attack on American merchant ships. At war for barely a month, few suspect German U-boats are lurking within sight of shore. The attack begins January 13th, 1942. After fighting the British for 2 years in the Atlantic, the Germans find America easy. Commander of U-552, Eric Topp.
Compared with the difficulties in the Atlantic War, it was a shooting of hares.
It took 1 week, as I remember, only 1 week all the time, and we sank, I think, about 10 ships.
America is completely unprepared.
And so we had a very easy game there.
January was just a slaughter.
January is just the beginning.
And this went on all the time. Bodies and wreckage and oil was constantly coming ashore down the coast as far as Florida.
We were really afraid of them. We were scared, and because it was an unseen weapon.
The U.S. Navy assures the public it has the U-boats under control.
Naturally, in time of war, you put your best foot forward. The Navy was saying, don't worry, we're taking care of these submarines. We're sinking them. In actuality, we hadn't sunk a single one.
In 1942, at the height of Operation Drumbeat, the German U-boat seems almost unstoppable. But was this machine as effective as it seemed? In a remarkable reversal, the hunters become the hunted. Barely 2 years after Drumbeat, the U-boats are suffering staggering losses. What then accounts for the U-boat's deadly reputation? If it truly was as lethal as its image would have us believe, how is it possible it was so decisively defeated? By the end of the war, the Allies sink 3/4 of Germany's combat U-boats. To this day, some 68 are still unaccounted for. A mere 60 miles from New Jersey, this is one of the lost U-boats. But no one knows which one.
First we went down, dropped our stage bottles. At that point, he went forward. I recovered some optics, but it's all fused together.
Looks like they're spirit gauge faces. They might have something written on them, so...
For 6 years, the group of divers that discovered the wreck has been trying to learn which U-boat it is. The team leader is professional diver John Chatterton. John's partners are Richard Kohler, a businessman, and John Yerga, also a professional diver.
There you go. Oh boy. So I'm going to see if we can find something here that's got an identifying mark on it.
Even conglomerated.
A U-boat number, a hull number, something like that. Yeah.
You know what this is?
Just like these.
Yes, it's got commands. From the commander to the engineer, or from the engineer to the commander.
After an attack where they've been heavily depth charged, this would be replacement parts for that. There you go, Patrick.
Every summer, these divers come here and search for artifacts, hoping one will identify the wreck.
Trying to base this on the U-8.
During the winters, they read and study blueprints, learning details about U-boats that will guide their diving.
That is going to be the determining factor.
They do this work not for money, but out of stubborn curiosity. After 6 years, they still have no answer.
We're not archaeologists, but you don't see archaeologists out here trying to do this work. What we're trying to do is identify the wreck. There's no treasure, there's no loot. The payment for us is solving the mystery.
We just want to positively identify this wreck. And then basically our search will be over. You agree?
The first day I dove on this wreck, I said, what is this thing doing here? How did it get here? What is it? And we're 6 years later, we're still trying to answer those questions.
The questions are simple, but finding answers means overcoming enormous obstacles. Every trip to the wreck takes 8 hours. Divers leave at midnight to arrive by dawn. They average a half a dozen trips every summer. But this far offshore, the weather is unpredictable. More than half the time, rough seas at the wreck site mean they cannot dive. Even in good weather, the diving is difficult and dangerous. The wreck is 230 feet down in cold, murky water.
The national safe diving maximum limit is supposed to be 130 feet. This is another 100 feet deeper. If anything goes wrong, you've got to fix it right then and there.
Their bodies can only tolerate 2 dives a day and no more than 30 minutes on the bottom. At this depth, any mistake can be fatal. But for these divers, the quest has become an obsession. No matter what it takes, they are determined to identify this U-boat. This wreck will not give up its secrets easily. After a half-century underwater, it now scarcely resembles a U-boat. But some of its original features, like this gun mount, can still be discerned. The port side rudder, one of 2 which steered the boat. A massive propeller, halfway buried in sand. The stove, where the lone cook prepared meals for 57 men. The officers' quarters. A rubber-soled shoe worn to minimize noise and escape detection. Valves for the diesel air intakes. Gauges for the diesel engines. One of the torpedo tubes, probably still loaded. A torpedo. Germany built more than 1,100 of these stealthy machines during the war. Today, only a handful remain. One of them is on display in Chicago. U-505 was captured by the U.S. Navy in 1944. 250 feet long, 22 feet wide, weighing 1,100 tons, this boat had only one purpose: to destroy. Looking at it from the outside reveals almost nothing about what made it work. Inside, it is a claustrophobic tube crammed with weapons and machinery. Torpedoes. These half-ton underwater guided missiles were the U-boat's primary weapon. They were stored and launched from 2 torpedo rooms, one at each end of the boat. 25 to 30 men would live crowded among the torpedoes for up to 3 months at a time. On the surface, 2 9-cylinder diesel engines drove the boat up to 18 knots, with a range of 11,000 miles. Underwater, electric motors took over, running off batteries located under the floor. But they had less than a quarter the power of the diesels. Submerged, the boat rarely went faster than 2 or 3 knots, with a range of barely 70 miles. Nor could it stay down long. 20 hours was about the limit before the batteries ran out and the crew starved for oxygen. At the center of the boat, the conning tower, and below it, the control room. A confusing maze of controls for steering, diving, and surfacing. It took about 9 months to build a boat like U-505, and it cost roughly $500,000. Compared to any other warship, it was cheap and quick to make. But it was built to attack. Its only defense was to hide deep in the ocean. There, its survival depended on its pressure hull. Not visible from the outside, the pressure hull is the submarine's only protection against the ocean. A long tube of circular ribs covered with steel plate. It's all that stands between the crew and thousands of tons of seawater. To destroy a submarine, it takes just one break in the pressure hull. The ocean does the rest. On the mystery wreck, the nature of the damage holds clues as to how the boat met its end. It must have been cataclysmic. The top of the pressure hull reveals an enormous crack, a giant split in the 1-inch steel. This boat must have suffered a massive explosion. The damage is centered in the control room. The conning tower is blown completely off the wreck. Whatever caused the explosion, with its pressure hull split wide open, the boat sinks like a stone, taking its crew to a death that cannot come fast enough. Whichever U-boat this is, its crew must have known the risk of venturing into the deep. For as long as submarines have existed, men have been dying in them. But despite the danger, the submarine has a powerful attraction: stealth. A goal as ancient as war itself. For centuries, designers around the world struggled to perfect a ship that can hide underwater. Submerging is easy. Early designs, like the one-man turtle used in the American Revolution, dive by flooding ballast tanks with seawater. To surface, this water is pumped out again. Today's modern submarines use the same method. But propulsion and a weapon are far more difficult problems. Early submarines rely on inefficient hand-cranked propellers. To attack, they must attach a bomb to the bottom of an enemy ship and try to get away, hopefully before it goes off. These limitations make early submarines far more dangerous to their operators than to their enemies. But the submarine is rescued from obscurity in 1866. An English engineer, Robert Whitehead, invents a bomb that can drive itself to the target from a safe distance: the torpedo. Unlike the gun, the traditional naval weapon, the new torpedo strikes below the waterline, where ships are most vulnerable. Early torpedoes only go in the direction they are pointed. But in the 1890s, when the gyroscope is added, the torpedo can now steer itself.
When the gyro was installed in the torpedo became a smart weapon. It was guided. So that even if the target was 90 degrees bearing from where you were pointing, you could turn the gyro 90 degrees, and as soon as the torpedo was fired, it would do a 90-degree turn and proceed to the target.
Whitehead originally intends his torpedo to be launched from tubes on land. But this underwater guided missile turns out to be the perfect weapon for the stealthy submarine. Now that it has a weapon, the submarine's remaining weakness is propulsion. At the dawn of the 20th century, motors replace hand cranking. Gasoline or diesel engines, which need air, are used on the surface. When submerged, electric motors run off batteries. By a fateful accident of history, the stealthy submarine and the smart torpedo are perfected just on the eve of World War I. Ironically, Germany is the last naval power to adopt the new vessel in 1906. The German term for it is Unterseeboot, an underwater boat. In just a few years, the whole world will come to know and fear its abbreviation: U-boat. As World War I begins, the submarine is not expected to play a pivotal role. But only 6 weeks into the war, a single German U-boat, U-9, sinks 3 British cruisers in less than an hour. The world is astounded.
The loss of all these cruisers and 3,000 men was a shock. It was like a Pearl Harbor for the British.
This is the first time the submarine ever showed its, sort of raised its ugly head, you know, in a warfare situation, and nobody was prepared for it.
In Germany, the commander of U-9, Otto Weddigen, becomes a new kind of hero, the daring submariner, who can bring down the mighty British with this marvelous new machine.
For the German public, the image of the German submariner became very similar to what the American astronaut became for the United States public in the 1950s and 60s. That these men were warriors, but they were explorers, they were technicians, they were scientists, they were men who were able to do anything.
One of thousands of young Germans mesmerized by the exploits of Weddigen is Eric Topp.
There was a picture of him hanging in my sleeping room, and every night I saw Weddigen there. And, well, he was attacking there in the North Sea. He was attacking 3 cruisers, light cruisers, and he was sinking them. And, of course, at that time, that was a fantastic success.
Weddigen's success is especially remarkable given the primitive nature of his vessel. U-9 is not very stealthy. Its engines emit clouds of smoke that can be seen for miles. It takes 7 minutes to dive just 30 feet. But it only needs a crew of 24. And any weapon that lets 24 men take down thousands of the enemy is hard to resist. Germany quickly capitalizes on this unexpected success. Shocking the world, U-boats start attacking the cargo ships that keep England alive. But shock turns to outrage when a U-boat sinks the passenger liner Lusitania in May 1915. "1,200 people are killed. Now, a different image of German submariners is born. U-boat men are bloodthirsty monsters, preying on innocent women and children. But despite the world's condemnation, the stealthy submarine is too effective not to use. There is nothing to stop it. In Britain and America, scientists rush to develop weapons for anti-submarine warfare, or ASW. The first new device that results is the depth charge, a bomb set off by water pressure. It explodes once it reaches a certain depth. But the ships can only guess where the U-boat is. There is still no way to find a submerged submarine. In April 1917, U-boats sink 1 out of every 4 ships that sails for England. But the solution to the U-boat threat has been available all along. Not a new technology. It is a centuries-old naval tactic. Convoying, putting ships in groups, protected by escorts.
That's the bait. That's what the submarines are looking for, so they're forced to go to the convoy if they're going to sink any ships.
By concentrating ships into a few large groups, convoys empty the oceans. Most U-boats now go days without spotting a target. If a U-boat does find a convoy, when it attacks, it reveals its position to the escorts.
The escorts are all armed, so it's shifted the balance. A well-protected convoy would lose ships, but at the same time the escorts would get submarines, and it shifted the whole calculus of the equation.
After 3 years of war, the British finally adopt the convoy system. It is a smashing success. In 1917, U-boats sink 3,000 ships. In 1918, only 134 ships are lost in convoys. In November 1918, Germany surrenders. The first submarine war in history is over. In only 4 years, this new weapon has sent over 5,000 ships to the bottom of the sea.
And that was 1/4 of all of the ships that existed at that time. So this unproven experimental submarine of the turn of the century turned into a major maritime threat.
When Germany surrenders, the Allies confiscate all her U-boats. But as the world celebrates peace, one U-boat captain is sitting in a British prison camp planning a response to the convoy. His name is Karl Dönitz, and he is already preparing for another submarine war. In less than 20 years, the U-boat will be reborn. And once again, thousands of sailors on both sides will die in watery graves. There are hundreds of U-boat wrecks lying on the ocean floor. 5 were sunk off the American coast. their positions recorded by the U.S. Navy. The Navy's World War II record, still on file in Washington, lists some 10,000 attacks on U-boats, but none at the location of the New Jersey wreck.
Had a pretty good handle on where the U-boat wrecks were, but not in the position that John Chatterton gave me.
Nor do German records mention any U-boat lost here. The identity of this boat will have to be found in the wreck itself. The divers begin making regular trips to the U-boat. They start searching randomly for any object that might contain information. At first, they are confident, even overconfident.
Well, come out here and we'll identify the wreck. How hard could it be? I think I might have even been the guy to say it is, how hard could this be? Like another day or two out here and we'll have this thing positively identified.
John handed me this underwater. I think he recovered it.
It was like a flurry of activity. We figured we'd have this thing identified in no time. But events 6 years hence have proved us wrong.
By the end of their first season, the divers have learned little.
Take up bowling.
Yeah, bowling. Bowling would be good.
Golf.
That doesn't exclude the 857 or the 879.
Over the winter, they gather information to better focus their search.
We pored over historic photographs of U-boats, propaganda films. The other thing we did was we spoke to veterans and people who were knowledgeable in U-boat life. And we said, well, what could we bring up from the wreck site that would give us positive identification on this wreck?
A U-boat veteran suggests looking for an escape lung, an emergency breathing device used to leave a sunken submarine. U-boat sailors often wrote their names on their escape lungs, and a name might help identify the wreck.
Right where those shelves were, there's a escape lung there. What I'd like to do is to go to recover that.
In dive after dive, they sift through the debris and locate several escape lungs.
Just trying to see if the mouthpiece is in here, guys.
Well, you know, according to the guys in Germany, all these guys' escape lungs had their names on them.
I don't see any writing, do you?
No. Yeah, you know what? Whatever they wrote it on doesn't seem to have lasted.
We recovered several of them, none of which had any identifying marks on them.
I don't know. Keep that plate, keep that plate.
The escape lungs proved disappointing. By now, the divers have been through most of the wreck without result. But there are two crucial areas they have yet to search.
We've been everywhere inside the wreck with the exception of the diesel motor room and the E-motor room. And unfortunately, we just haven't been successful. You know,
The electric motor room may hold the key. The divers have learned that boxes of spare parts stored here were often marked with tags bearing the U-boat's number. But reaching the electric motor room means passing through the diesel room. And the divers learned early on that the diesel motor room is perhaps the most dangerous place in the wreck.
I got my body halfway in the opening. I saw the cables hanging and all the debris just jutting out at angles. Kind of lost my nerve. It spooked me. You've got exhaust manifolds, pipe, plumbing, flanges, cables galore. All these objects just trying to grab you, seems at times. And not only that, because the diesel motor room has all this huge equipment, you could bump into it And that's when it chooses to break free, on top of you.
One over ground that we've already looked at. Right. We're rehashing it.
You didn't come out with anything, did you?
No. Everywhere else we've been to at least once.
Having exhausted all other possibilities, the divers feel they have no choice. They will attempt the dangerous passage into the E-motor room.
So we got to go where we haven't been.
The plan is to enter the hatch, pass between the diesel motors, and continue into the electric motor room. The attempt begins. They pass through the hatch as planned. But as they approach the diesels, they discover their path is blocked. A large oil tank, normally bolted to the ceiling, has fallen. The space below the tank is too shallow to permit a diver to pass. Above, the gap between the tank and the pressure hull is also too small. Unable to continue past the tank, they abort the dive. A significant area of the wreck cannot be searched. It is a major setback. But the dive is not a total loss. On his way out of the diesel motor room, John Chatterton notices a sheet of metal that seems to have writing on it. This sheet of aluminum is marked with a schematic diagram, but it's the small print in the lower corners that interests the divers.
9C, Deschemeg, Bremen. That told us that this U-boat is definitely a Type 9C-40 German U-boat built at the Deschemeg plant in Bremen, Germany.
We know that it's a Deschemeg Bremen boat. That's our limiting factor.
From there, we were able to say, okay, there's only 25 boats of this type that were built at that plant.
At last, the divers have a clue that narrows the field. For this wreck to be a Type 9 is not surprising. The Type 9 was a long-range boat used to patrol distant waters off Africa or America. It is designed in the 1930s as Germany starts to rearm. After World War I, the Germans are banned from having any submarines. But in 1935, the British allowed Germany to once again build U-boats. The British are confident they have nothing to fear because they now have ASDIC, or sonar, to locate submerged submarines. But Karl Dönitz, commander of Germany's new U-boat force, thinks ASDIC is overrated. It only works underwater, so he will use his U-boats in a way the British are not expecting.
Dönitz wanted to use the boats more as surface torpedo vessels, vessels that could submerge and escape danger, but which would do most of their damage on the surface.
To overcome convoys, Dönitz will use group attacks. Large numbers of U-boats will silently stalk convoys by day, then swarm in at night for the kill. Dönitz calls this the wolf pack.
Like an antibody in the bloodstream destroying a virus, they will converge on a convoy. So what he needs are massive numbers of U-boats to accomplish that.
But Hitler doesn't wait for the boats to be built. On September 1st, 1939, Hitler invades Poland. Two days later, England declares war on Germany. The German Navy has only 57 U-boats, a fraction of what Dönitz needs. Still, he has not forgotten the lesson of Wedekind in World War I, who showed the world the power of a single U-boat. Dönitz plans a daring mission. He will send Günther Prien in U-47 into the home port of the British fleet. Six weeks into the war, Prien sinks the British battleship Royal Oak in its own harbor. It is a stunning victory. In Germany, Prien becomes a legend. The greatest U-boat hero since Wedekind. Just as Dönitz predicted, Asdic has made the British overconfident.
The British Admiralty, I think, overestimated her anti-submarine warfare capabilities, especially the Asdic. And the first tactical approach of German U-boats was attacking not in a submerged stage, but on surface.
It takes a lot of nerve to attack on the surface, but Dönitz hammers home his message. The way to win is to be daring.
He's going to be the kind of leader who will constantly push his people to be as aggressive as possible, on the edge of being caught or being sunk, always on the brink of perhaps recklessness. But he believes that only that will bring the victory in the end.
Well, you always have to take risk. That is clear. But it was a thin line. I had to be aware that I was responsible for my crew. On the other hand, my task was to sink ships.
The U-boat men call this the happy time. A desperate Winston Churchill turns to America. The U.S. Navy begins escorting British convoys carrying vital supplies. 6 months before Pearl Harbor, America is fighting an undeclared war against the U-boats. One of those U-boats is commanded by Eric Topp. In the early morning of October 31st, 1941, he spots a target.
A convoy. In my eyes, of course, a British convoy.
He fires a torpedo at what he assumes to be a British destroyer.
Then, after a certain time, I saw a big explosion like a volcano.
But the destroyer Topp has sunk is the USS Reuben James, technically a neutral ship. It is a mistake Topp will never forget.
After the war, I heard more than 100 men had been were killed in the fire, in the explosion, in the cold water, and that I never forget in my life. It is like a shadow that is lying over my life.
Topp's tragic error might have had grave political repercussions. But 5 weeks later, it doesn't matter. America enters the war anyway.
Since Sunday, a state of war has existed between the United States and the Japanese Empire.
2 days after the Japanese attack Pearl Harbor, Hitler declares war on the U.S. without consulting his Navy.
When Germany declared war on the United States, it was at this exact time a surprise for the naval staff. And the Navy was unprepared to send a U-boat force to the American East Coast.
Dönitz has only 5 U-boats available, but he wants to attack as quickly as possible before the Americans have a chance to organize convoys.
The German naval staff was from the beginning on the opinion, well, the Americans will introduce the convoy system in a couple of weeks, and then there will be no chance for our submarines against the traffic there.
But weeks become months, and still there are no convoys.
The United States Navy and the United States generally was unprepared for their onslaught. The ships, the merchant ships that operated along the coastline, used their radios openly, plain language. They sailed with their navigation lights on. They made it easy.
A small number of German U-boats came to the east coast of the United States and sunk almost 400 ships. And that was the most massive military defeat the U.S. Navy has ever suffered.
As the sinkings mount, the British press the U.S. to protect its coastal shipping with convoys. But Navy Commander Admiral Ernest King refuses.
He held to the view that a convoy that was not well defended, was not well equipped, was worse than no convoy at all.
With a 2-ocean war to fight and much of his fleet sunk at Pearl Harbor, King simply doesn't have enough escort ships.
Admiral King was not a friend of the British, but neither was he a fool.
Defending cargo ships isn't King's only problem. He also has to worry about American troops sailing for England.
We had to make a choice of whether we used our resources to protect troop ships or cargo ships. This is the key. And Admiral King said, we're going to protect the troop ships. We will not lose one troop ship.
Even as U-boats are sinking hundreds of merchant ships, the Navy escorts over 150,000 American troops across the Atlantic. Not one is lost. By May, 5 months after Operation Drumbeat began, King finally has enough escort ships to begin coastal convoys.
And when they did, the sinkings by U-boats practically dropped to nothing.
The U-boats pull back into the Atlantic. Drumbeat is the U-boat's greatest victory of the entire war, but in the end, it accomplishes little.
It did not knock us out of the war. Our oil was coming from Texas by pipelines, and the U-boats couldn't sink the pipelines.
Drumbeat was not an Atlantic Pearl Harbor. That's not the case at all.
Never again will large groups of U-boats attack the U.S. But until the last day of the war, single boats continue to come right up to our doorstep. Lone wolves on the prowl. "757 German U-boats were sent to the bottom during World War II. The vast majority in waters far too deep to dive. In theory, at 230 feet, this New Jersey wreck is also too deep. Going to this depth on scuba technology is an invitation to trouble. And early on, trouble strikes.
We had a fatality. And I can't say it really was unexpected, because we've had fatalities deep diving before on other deep wrecks like the U-boat.
While down at the wreck, one of the divers, Steve Feldman, becomes unconscious and is swept away.
That man's body was not recovered for 6 months. And when it was subsequently recovered, by that time, there was no way that they can ascertain exactly what killed him.
It certainly had an impact on everyone diving the wreck. And some of the guys who were on the trip that day never went back to that wreck, and there were even some that never went back to diving.
We all took a step backwards and said, hey, we're diving deeper than the U.S. Navy says is safe. We're at a point where oxygen becomes poisonous to the human body.
Breathing air at extreme depths can cause confusion, called narcosis, as well as seizures. There is an alternative called trimix, a blend of nitrogen, helium, and less oxygen than air. But trimix is untested in recreational diving.
The way we had looked at it in the past was that all it did was give you a clearer head, in that it reduced the amount of nitrogen narcosis you'd suffer at depth. But another thing it did was it lowered the percentage of oxygen in the gas you were breathing.
For safety reasons, the divers experiment with trimix. But they quickly discover safety is not its only benefit.
On air, you've almost got a tunnel vision. Certainly your peripheral vision is not very good. When you go down on mix, the wreck is almost alive, and your peripheral vision is excellent.
You could do repetitive dives. You could do 2 dives a day with trimix. And we were able to get a 30-minute time on the wreck, whereas 18 was my maximum time before that.
Better vision and longer dives make a difference. Searching the crew's quarters, John Chatterton discovers what appears to be an ordinary table knife. But on closer look, it seems he may have found exactly what they have been looking for.
I was running my thumb over it, and I could feel some sort of writing on it.
There was a name inscribed into the handle, and the name was Hornberg.
At last, the divers have learned the identity of a crewman. Someone on the mystery U-boat was named Hornberg. Whoever Hornberg may have been, he was one of 45,000 men who served in U-boats. Allied propaganda portrayed them as fanatical Nazis, but this was more myth than reality.
Membership in the Nazi Party was prohibited if you were on active duty. You had to yield your membership in any political party.
Most were in their teens or early 20s and had started out full of romantic notions of adventure at sea. Not all were volunteers, but theirs was a service with a mystique.
U-boat crews got the best treatment, the best food, the best pay, better promotion potential, and the image of an elite service developed within the minds of the German public and within the minds of those who served aboard German submarines.
You know, when we came back, there was a big show in the harbor. Flowers and ladies welcoming us. And what the submariners did on board became present to the whole population in Germany.
Darunter befanden sich etwa 200 Tanker mit fast 1,5 Millionen Bruttoregistertonnen.
Newsreels made with actual combat footage were used to glorify the U-boats. But the newsreels never told the terrible truth about the odds of survival. Nearly 70% of the men who went to sea in U-boats died in them. Some 28,000 men shared the same fate as Hornberg. Now, 50 years after he carved his name into its handle, Hornberg's knife seems to be the key to the mystery.
H-O-R-E.
If the divers can learn who Hornberg was and which U-boat he was on, they may have identified the wreck.
Brad Sheard was standing next to me, and he slapped me on the back, and he said, that's it. You've identified the wreck. All you have to do is find Horenberg.
To learn more about Horenberg, John and Richie travel to Germany. They take their evidence to the U-boat archive in Altenbruck, run by U-boat veteran Horst Bredau.
Mr. Bredau.
Hello.
I'm John Chatterton.
Hello. Yeah.
We're the divers who...
Have we already had contact?
No, I don't believe so.
No. We found a U-boat off the coast of New Jersey.
We must look for it. We must have a look for it. We go first upstairs to look for the boats, yeah?
Bredau's archive is the most complete source of information in the world concerning Germany's U-boats and the men who sailed them.
There's a history of all 1,171 boats. I will not say that the history is complete, but almost complete.
We have some objects that we'd like to share with you.
The first piece of evidence here, this is a schematic diagram, and here, of course, it identifies it as a Type 9C, Deschamag Bremen.
Do you have an idea what boat it could be?
Yes. Richie, the knife?
Sure.
One of the things that we'd found off the wreck was this knife.
You see on the alphabetical list of the killed men.
Bredau's records include a file on each boat, as well as a list of all the men who died in U-boats.
Horenberg.
Remarkably, Bredau finds there was only one man named Horenberg in the entire U-boat service. His first name was Martin.
Look, Horenberg, Funkmeister.
These are alphabetically listing of all
killed men. Yeah,
and there's only one Horenberg.
Only one Horenberg.
Is the spelling the same on the knife?
Yeah, the same. It's just the same.
It turns out that Martin Horenberg served on several U-boats. The boat he died on was U-869. But according to Bredau, 869 cannot be the mystery wreck.
Horenberg was a crew member of 869, and this is the boat sheet of U-869. And here you see, it was lost at the 28th of February 1945 in the Middle Atlantic, near Rabat.
The record shows that U-869 was sunk off North Africa, near the entrance to the Mediterranean Sea.
The records record that as off of Gibraltar, right?
Yeah,
or
it
North Africa.
Cannot be at the shore or at the coast of New Jersey.
It seemed pretty conclusive that this submarine with the U-869 is sunk off Gibraltar. So how did Horenberg's knife get on this submarine?
We thought that maybe someone stole Horenberg's knife, maybe he gave it to a friend, maybe Horenberg was transferred.
All we know is that we have a German U-boat with a knife with the name Horenberg on it, and there was only one guy named Horenberg in the whole German Navy.
What seemed to be the most promising of leads has been no help at all.
Forget the Horenberg knife. It's a dead end. Start over. Go back to the wreck. Find something else.
The more the divers learn about this wreck, the more enigmatic it becomes. Aside from its identity, one of the most puzzling questions is how it met its end. To find out more about what might have sunk the U-boat, John Chatterton shows a videotape of the damage to U.S. Navy underwater demolition experts.
And they looked at the damage to the wreck, and they concluded that it didn't appear to them as though the damage was from depth charges.
According to the Navy, depth charges would not cause damage this severe. They suggest the boat was sunk by something more powerful than a depth charge, perhaps a torpedo. But whose torpedo? The records show the Allies never attacked a U-boat at this location. The divers are left to wonder if this boat was sunk by its own torpedo. Perhaps the U-boat spotted a ship, fired at it, only to have something go disastrously wrong.
If a steering motor stuck or a gyro tumbled or anything else, a natural hydrodynamic trajectory for the weapon is to go into a circle. So once you start a torpedo circling, you become the prime candidate to get hit by your own torpedo.
If a U-boat crew suspected their own torpedo was circling back, their only hope for escape would be an emergency dive. It begins with the order, alarm. To make an 1,100-ton boat vanish, a complex series of events must unfold with precise timing. In the diesel motor room, the crew shuts off the diesels and closes the air intakes. Now the electric motors take over. The commander gives the order. Fluten, flood the tanks. Valves are open, letting seawater into ballast tanks. Men who are not on duty run forward. Their weight helps point the boat down. The emergency dive is the most critical test a U-boat crew can face. Seconds mean life or death.
From the order alarm, it took 30 seconds to disappear from the surface, and another 30 seconds to be on a depth of 60 meters. But it was only possible with a well-trained crew, of course. And 30 seconds can be a long time in war.
For the scuba diver, submerging is also complex. As with a U-boat, diving and surfacing require careful, precise timing. On Columbus Day weekend, 1992, the divers get a grim reminder of how unforgiving the process can be. A pair of experienced divers, Chris Rouse and his son, Chris Jr., are about to search the galley.
The plan was that the father would stay outside and Chrissy Jr. would swim in to the wreck.
Inside the wreck, something goes terribly wrong.
The son had gotten past the galley, struck something, and it fell on him. And he was in a cloud of silt he couldn't see and he couldn't move.
He remains trapped for nearly 30 minutes. Then his father goes in looking for him.
He managed to find the boy, extricated the kid, and they both exited the submarine.
But by now they are running out of air, and they cannot locate their spare tanks.
I think at this point they were both panicking, they were both extremely low on air, and they made a decision. They just surfaced from 230 feet.
But a diver at 230 feet cannot just surface. Under pressure, his breathing forces more gas into his body than it can hold on the surface. At depth, his blood is now like the soda in an unopened bottle. If the pressure is suddenly lowered, gas that was dissolved now forces its way out of the liquid in the form of bubbles. To avoid bubbles forming in his blood, the diver must decompress, come up in stages, letting his body reduce the gas gradually.
The longer you stay down, the longer those stages are going to be. You come up to 110 feet, you have to wait for a minute, and so on and so forth, until you finally surface.
In their panic, the father and son come up without decompressing. Their bodies are still saturated with inert gas. No longer under pressure, this gas begins bubbling out of their blood.
The son could not use his legs, and we literally had to drag him up the ladder.
The father died at the back of the boat, but the last thing he did was tell us to take his son on board first.
called the Coast Guard. They flew a helicopter out. We cut our anchor lines and started heading back in towards shore to meet the helicopter.
The son lived on the boat. He lived for a couple of hours in the helicopter, and he died in the recompression chamber in the hospital.
Three divers have now died on the U-boat. John Yerga is starting to wonder if the risk of continuing is simply too great.
When the father and son team died, I looked at those two guys and said, I don't know that I belong here. If these guys, knowing as much as they did, died diving this wreck, what am I doing going to these depths and making these kind of dives?
The following week, John and Richie go back to the wreck to shoot video and analyze what went wrong.
It was a very somber dive. To see their equipment strewn about the wreck with their name on it. They were good divers. And every dive I've made ever since then, that's in the back of my mind.
The tragedy brings another dive season to a close. Over the winter, the team will regroup.
It's not that we didn't think about that incident very seriously, but I don't think there was ever any consideration that maybe we should stop.
But still, the divers are no closer to finding the answer. Each has his own reason for continuing. For Richie, it is a sense of responsibility to the families of the lost crew.
It's not a personal challenge, it's more that I think I'm doing the right thing. I think that if we drop the ball on this and stop, it'll just stay the way it had been for 50 years. No one knew it was there, and not really anybody cared.
But for John Chatterton, it is the challenge of solving the mystery, finishing what he has begun.
I've corresponded with U-boat men, historians, authors. Nobody can tell me what boat this is. I don't want to give up, and the only other option is to carry it through to its conclusion.
Now, in the spring of 1997, John Chatterton comes up with a daring plan to get into the electric motor room where there may be boxes of spare parts that can identify the U-boat. John will remove all his tanks of gas except one. Pushing this single tank in front of him, he will squeeze his body through the narrow space above the oil tank. Once past the obstruction, he'll put his tank back on and proceed into the E-motor room. To Richie, it seems foolish.
It's not worth it to me. I'm not going to do that. It's too dangerous. I have kids. I don't think that it's a safe thing to do.
We have to figure out a way to get in there. Yeah, there's the potential for somebody getting hurt for pushing a little too hard. I'm not 100% sure I can make it. But there's also experience and skill and ability, and I rely on that. And then up and over the top of that.
Tomorrow morning, John Chatterton, with thousands of hours underwater, will make the most dangerous dive of his life. Morning arrives. The tension is palpable.
This is a very dangerous wreck. So far, 3 men have lost their lives. It's one thing if you're just going on a sightseeing dive. It's another thing if you're going to dive down to 230 feet and penetrate into this broken ship. It takes a lot. It really takes a lot. It takes a lot of nerve. and it also takes a lot of experience.
Richie, if it looks like I'm having trouble, you give me as much time as you think you can safely give me to let me work it out myself. Anything that's 3 taps, 3 tugs, or 3 punches means trouble. And we're out of there.
Got it.
Cool?
Yep.
Let's do it.
If John's plan works, he will soon enter a place unseen and untouched since the day the U-boat sank. With Richie's help, John secures his decompression gases and removes his single tank. With only 20 minutes of gas, John swims through the hatch into the diesel room. Richie follows. John squeezes over the collapsed oil tank. Once past the oil tank, he's on his own. He plans to be back in 10 minutes. John and Richie won't reappear on the surface for over an hour. As the minutes pass, the team can only wonder what's happening below. While waiting for John, Richie searches the diesel room for artifacts. It's been 10 minutes. Richie can see John's light faintly in the distance. He squeezes in for a closer look. Something isn't right. John's blue tank is visible, but he's not moving closer. Richie isn't sure what's happening, but there's nothing he can do to help. He has to start back. The divers on deck know John is running late, but they don't know why.
There was a problem with communications, and then he didn't come out, which to say made me a little apprehensive.
Finally, John appears.
How you doing, John?
Yeah. No better. Tried to pass you the camera back.
Right. Which I figured you were done filming at that point.
I got in there, I got my tank back on, and I pulled a big piece of wreckage from the starboard diesel motor. A piece of manifold or something. It wasn't a pipe.
Accidentally?
Well, yeah, I didn't do it on purpose.
No, because when you went in, you kicked a piece off. It's going to be on the video, and it hit me. And that's why
a big, long piece of heavy steel. I tried to get out from underneath it, and then it, like, swung down around and landed in my lap. You know, it wasn't so heavy I couldn't lift it up, but I couldn't get it off of me.
So what did you do for 20 minutes on the other side of the engine? I'm not being wise.
I spent the whole dive trying to get the steel off of me.
Did you see my light every so many minutes come by and swing the light?
Yeah, somehow that didn't warm my heart any. It was like...
Pinned down by a piece of wreckage, John is lucky to escape with his life.
Something wasn't going right, but
The next morning, he'll try again. With John past the obstruction, Richie hands him the camera. Now holding the camera, John swims through the door to the rear of the diesels and, for the first time, enters the electric motor room. On the right, controls for the electric motor. A fuse panel. Spare parts boxes. If John can break them loose without causing debris to collapse, one of these may finally identify the wreck. Back at the obstruction, Richie has been waiting nearly 20 minutes. The memory of yesterday's near disaster fresh in his mind. At last, John reappears with a box. He hands it to Richie. They send it up on a lift bag.
The bag make it up, Jack?
Bag's up.
All right. It went right according to plan. John went in. I stayed on top of the obstruction. It seemed like forever. And all of a sudden, he came back. I see his light flickering in the distance. He just hands me this big green bag. And it's so heavy that I had to kind of like lump myself out of the rack.
I got the one box out, handed it to Richie.
Yeah.
I went in for the second box. I couldn't break it free. Then I went to go out.
Did the bag come up?
Yeah. Well, we got one box out. There's a bunch more down there. I wanted to get as many shots at this as I can, but we'll take a look and see what we got.
Tag 117.
117.
That's not a U-boat number, though.
No.
Got a hand on here.
Oh, well, wait a minute, right here. Right here.
What does it say?
U-869.
All right!
That's it, man. All right. Interestingly enough, I think it took us longer to identify this wreck than it did to actually fight the war. So, absolutely, positively, this is the U-869. We've got the schematic diagram showing that it's a Type 9C 40.
Knife.
We've got the Horenberg knife, which places Martin Horenberg on this ship. We've got the tag here that says U-869, which was, historically speaking, the ship that Horenberg was on, but the U-869 is listed as being sunk off Africa. This rules it out. It's definitely, beyond any shadow of a doubt, the 869. The page of history that has the 869 sunk off the coast of Gibraltar has got to be rewritten.
After 6 years and 3 deaths, the divers have finally identified the mystery wreck, U-869. But now, a new mystery emerges. Why was U-869, Martin Horenberg's boat, here instead of Africa? The final entry in U-869's war diary has the boat leaving for her first patrol on the 23rd of November, 1944. Just 2.5 years since the U-boat's triumph in Operation Drumbeat. Now, Drumbeat and the happy times were little more than distant memories from a far different war. U-boat Commander Dönitz had originally planned only to fight England. He had never envisioned what it would mean to face the United States as well.
Most of the German military and political elite underestimated the capacity and the resources of the United States of America.
One of America's most important resources is science. At universities and research centers, scientific teams are developing new technologies to hunt U-boats.
And they initiated a fairly heavy effort on this, including MIT, Harvard Underwater Sound Laboratory, Columbia University, Western Electric, Bell Labs, sort of a all-to-the-wall effort.
One focus of the scientific effort is radar. Since the 1930s, German scientists have also been working on radar. Though aware of this work, Dönitz fails to appreciate the magnitude of the threat.
He rather ignored the comments of an observer who pointed out that much of his surface operations would be detected by radar, which was then being developed by all the navies. And Dönitz sloughed that off, saying, well, we're not going to worry about that.
All of a sudden during the war, there was a tendency that we were surprised by aircraft without knowing how they could find us. Slowly it developed that, yes, they must have radar.
Beyond radar, Dönitz's greatest miscalculation is his obsessive use of radio. He sends some boats as many as 70 messages a day.
Dönitz was rather nosy. He wanted to know from us quite often how we were doing, where we were, and all this sort of thing.
The constant radio traffic exposes the U-boats to Allied high-frequency direction finding, or HFDUF. If a U-boat uses its radio, HFDUF can pinpoint its position using triangulation.
If we send any signals whatsoever from our submarine, we practically were giving away our location at that time.
Together, radar and HFDUF force the U-boats to submerge. And a submerged U-boat is too slow to catch a target. It is also too slow to escape. The ships above are hunting it with sound. All the men can do is remain silent.
We tried to be as quiet as possible inside the boat. We took our shoes off. We were only walking around in socks, and anybody who dared to cough or drop a spoon was immediately ostracized and considered to be an absolute enemy of the boat.
When an escort locates a U-boat, the depth charging begins.
It is a scary experience to hear a depth charge dropping into the water and then expect in about 5 or 10 seconds an explosion to go off, which one does not know at this particular time one will survive. After the explosion goes off, then of course the next one is already coming. This can go on for 10 hours at a time with hundreds of depth charges, and each one of those is really quite a strain on your nerves, because all you're doing is sitting and waiting for something to happen. There's nothing you can do. You can just sit there and wait.
Slowly but inexorably, the Allies are gaining the upper hand. The turning point comes in a single month the U-boat men will forever remember as Black May.
May 43, when in 1 month 41 submarines were destroyed.
The hunters of the early years had become the hunted of the latter years. The happy times had changed to what we called die saure Gurkenzeit, or sour pickle time. We didn't have any fun out there anymore.
In the autumn of 1943, a crisis in morale began to develop within the U-boat service, simply because there was the obvious recognition that they were outmatched by the Allies.
It became very questionable. Why do we go out there? when our flotilla chief could say to us when we left, never mind sinking ships, just come back, please.
Coming back is getting harder and harder to do. Aircraft now patrol the entire ocean. The only way to avoid them is to remain constantly submerged. But that is impossible.
A U-boat of that period, as earlier in the war, had to spend at least 4 hours on the surface every 24 hours in order to recharge its battery. By late 1943, the omnipresence of Allied aircraft had eliminated all safe areas in the ocean.
Even at night or in a dense fog, an airplane with radar can detect a U-boat on the surface. Strangely, U-boat command has long ignored a Dutch device that allows a submarine to remain submerged.
Finally, belatedly, the U-boat command introduced the mass use of the Snorkel, a very simple device and one that did not significantly improve operational performance, but which at least allowed U-boats to recharge their batteries while submerged without danger of attack.
The Snorkel is a mast that can be raised like a periscope. It sucks fresh air into the boat for the diesels and the crew and vents poisonous exhaust out. The Snorkel allows U-boats to stay hidden, but their slow underwater speed cripples their ability to hunt. What Dönitz really needs is a design revolution. A vessel that can remain constantly underwater.
The concept argues that we have a submarine, a vessel, whose natural habitat is below the surface and not on the surface. It's a step out of necessity, because on the surface means death.
A true submarine has long been the dream of Professor Helmuth Walter. Since the 1930s, he has been working on a turbine that runs off hydrogen peroxide, H2O2. Since this fuel contains its own oxygen, the engine needs no outside air. For underwater speed, he uses a highly streamlined hull. During 1940, in utmost secrecy, a Walter prototype is tested and reaches an astounding 30 knots underwater, 4 times faster than any submarine in the world. But hydrogen peroxide is desperately needed for Hitler's V-2 rockets. Work on the Walter turbine grinds to a halt. But Walter's use of streamlining becomes the inspiration for a new U-boat that will revolutionize submarine war, the Type 21. On the surface, it uses ordinary diesel engines, but its electric motors have 5 times more power than a conventional U-boat. With its massive banks of batteries, the Type 21 is actually faster underwater than it is on the surface. Gone are the deck guns, platforms, and railings. The Type 21 is not intended to fight on the surface. In the long history of the submarine, this is the first true underwater craft.
They could replenish their air through the Snorkel, they could recharge their batteries, and doing 17 knots submerged was absolutely unheard of. The U.S. Navy and the Royal Navy had no way to respond to it. This is what gave ASW officers and surface ships nightmares.
But the Type 21s aren't ready until the last week of the war.
I had one of these Type 21 submarines, and I was the second boat that went out 1st of May 1945. So it was too late.
The Type 21 U-boat will redefine the future of the submarine. But it has no effect on the outcome of the war for which it was designed. In the end, the German U-boat is decisively defeated.
When you are being told today that German submarines sank 2,000 ships and so many millions of tons, they are not telling you what ridiculously small percentage that actually is of those ships which crossed the Atlantic without ever being bothered by a German submarine.
In reality, the German U-boat in World War II failed badly. They sank only about 1% of all shipping by the Allies anywhere. In other words, 99% of our ships, no matter where they were going, got through.
Still, the U-boat threat has tied down Allied resources in the Atlantic that could otherwise bring the war to Germany.
Hitler always said, the U-boats are my first line of defense. They were to keep the Anglo-American enemy at arm's length while he fought his war in Russia and in the death camps of Auschwitz.
To satisfy Hitler, the U-boat crews are deliberately sacrificed. In the closing months of the war, the life expectancy of a U-boat man is barely 60 days. Yet Dönitz keeps sending them out.
U-boat service lost 28,000 dead and 5,000 captured out of a total force of perhaps 45 to 48,000 men. A permanent casualty rate of over 70%. No branch of an armed forces has ever sustained those kind of losses and kept functioning.
In spite of the fact that of 10 submarines leaving port, perhaps 2 were expected to come back and 8 were not, when we left, we were absolutely sure we were going to be one of the 2 which would come home. This, of course, is a totally irrational approach to the problem, but it helped us go out time and time again.
But even the most optimistic U-boat man might have hesitated to go out had he known the greatest secret of the U-boat war. The Allies have broken the German code. By decoding Dönitz's radio messages, they know where each U-boat is headed, even before it gets there. A machine called Enigma encodes all German messages. Because it uses millions of random letter combinations, German experts assume Enigma cannot be broken. But British intelligence cracks the code.
They were able to decode within half a day, roundabout. They were decoding all the messages that were sent from the center to the boats.
Some U-boat commanders suspect the Allies are reading their messages, but they cannot convince Dönitz.
We had always the meaning that something must be happened in this field. But Dönitz and his experts said, impossible. There are millions of possibilities that we can put into the Enigma machine, and it's impossible for somebody to break it.
The Allied code breaking, called Ultra, is one of the greatest secrets of World War II. At the time, Ultra enabled ASW forces to track and hunt down individual U-boats. Today, Ultra can help Nova piece together the story of U-869's last patrol. Radio is central to the story, and so is Martin Horenberg. On U-869, he is the chief radio man. The story begins on the 23rd of November, 1944. After 11 months of training, U-869 is ready to go. Her captain is 26-year-old Helmut Neuerberg. This is his first command. December 8th, 1944. U-869 leaves Norway on her first patrol. She sails for the Atlantic. 3 weeks later, U-Boat Command sends 869 her assignment: patrol the approaches to New York Harbor. U-869 is required to signal back and acknowledge her orders. But after several days, U-Boat Command has heard nothing. In fact, U-869 has answered, but Command has not heard her. The problem may be weather, or perhaps trouble with 869's radio. Whatever the reason, both 869 and U-Boat Command are trying to communicate and not hearing each other. But Ultra Codebreakers are hearing both of them. They now know U-869 is heading for New York. Meanwhile, U-Boat Command has grown concerned that U-869 may be low on fuel. They change her orders to someplace closer, Gibraltar.
U-boat headquarters wrongly assumed that she had used up a great deal of fuel. So they said, okay, she'll never be able to get to America with the fuel she has and get back.
U-Boat Command is now expecting 869 to arrive off Gibraltar by February 1st. But she never acknowledges her new orders. The codebreakers wonder if perhaps U-869 missed the signal and is continuing to her original assignment off New York. Throughout February, the Allied codebreakers remain confused. Is U-869 patrolling off Gibraltar or New York? Wherever U-869 went, by March 5th, the codebreakers assume she is now probably homebound. May 8th, 1945. The war in Europe is over. Germany signs the surrender. The ground troops lay down their arms immediately. U-boats at sea are ordered to surface and surrender. But the Allies fear many may disobey. Hundreds of boats fail to return. To be sure none have escaped, the Allies review the German loss records. In the case of U-869, German records show she was ordered to Gibraltar and presumed lost there sometime around February 20th. The U.S. Navy looks at its records for the Gibraltar area. They find 3 attacks that might have sunk U-869 and conclude she was probably sunk by the USS Fowler and the French ship L'Industrie on the 28th of February. Their conclusion becomes the official record of U-869's fate. It is this story that is engraved on the wall of Germany's U-boat memorial and told to the families of her crew. But in all probability, U-869 never receives her new orders. She does not go to Gibraltar, but continues on to New York and disappears. Until half a century later, the divers uncover her story. 3 months after identifying the wreck, John and Richie return to Germany. Again, they visit Horst Bredau's U-boat archive, this time to correct the official record of U-869.
When I came here to see you last, we had the Horenberg knife.
That is the problem. Because Horenberg, I will show you.
We've done some research on this.
Yeah, but look, Horenberg.
Bredau is not easily convinced. He has a hard time believing his records are wrong.
He was killed on U-869.
That's the U-boat that we've been working on.
On U-869, and now I'll show you. U-869 has not been in the area you found this boat.
If you go back and you research the original documents,
That is it what I don't
you
believe
might come
here.
to that same conclusion.
But I don't believe it. It's not. I cannot believe it. It is impossible because we exactly know the position where it was lost.
Herr Bredau, what we did was
at great difficulty, we've been able to get inside the wreck and recover an object that hopefully would have the U-boat's number. Now, as you can see, it's deteriorating terribly.
But on the face here
was 2 tags.
One tag was mounted there with that number on it, and Richie's cleaned up the other tag.
And as you can see, sir, it says U-869. This came from New Jersey coast. Somehow, an error was made, and the U-869 operated off the coast of New Jersey,
That's right.
where she ultimately died.
If this is original, I would say you are real right.
We have photographic evidence of the recovery.
This is original, yeah?
Yes, sir.
That shows real that it must have been U-869. Yeah? This is a beweis. A proof, a real proof. Now I believe you are right.
Fantastic.
I believe you are right.
Well, thank you. It took us 6 years, but
6 years for one boat.
Yes, sir.
I took 50 years for 1,171 boats. Do you understand my problem?
Well, yes, sir. You have a better average than I do.
Yeah, but you should be my cooperators.
Well, thank you very much.
It's real true. Yeah. Thank you.
She's come home.
Yeah. Thank you very much.
You're very welcome,
Yeah.
sir.
Thank you for these words.
Thank you.
Thank you. Coming home, yeah.
Half a century after she vanished without a trace, the final resting place of U-869 is now a matter of record. But questions about U-869 linger. Why she missed the message redirecting her to Gibraltar, and what caused her to sink, will always remain mysteries. What can be said is that U-869 went out on a nearly suicidal mission late in the war. She survived barely 2 months, and like 1/3 of all U-boats sunk, was lost on her first patrol. Radio man Martin Horenberg had been in U-boats since the war began. It was practically a miracle he was still alive when 869 sailed. Little is known about the other crewmen, but 3 families have been located. Willy Rochprock was a machinist on U-869. His brother, Johann, was put to work at the Deschemag shipyard when he was 14. It's possible Johann helped build the boat his brother died in. Helmut Neuerberg, captain of U-869, left behind a 3-year-old son, Jürgen. Today, Jürgen is a doctor in Hamburg. Before his father left, he wrote Jürgen a farewell letter.
Soon, Papi must go with his U-boat in the sea, and we all hope that we will see us again in peaceful times. That's the last I see of my father.
Seaman Otto Britius would have had his 20th birthday in February 1945, right around the time that 869 sank. Today, Otto's sister lives in Maryland, a few hours from the New Jersey coast. Her name is Barbara Bowling. All she's ever known about her brother's death is that he was lost in a U-boat off Gibraltar. Richie Kohler has gotten her address from sources in Germany. Now he's come to tell Barbara what the divers discovered about her brother's boat.
Well, he was born in a little village in Germany. The name of the village is Sternbach, and his name was Otto Bretius. He was very skilled. He was very good with his hands. So I don't know whether they picked him because of his background, of his schooling he had.
Otto was picked for the U-boats when he is barely 17. He never returns. The family is told only that Otto was lost off Gibraltar. That is what Barbara still believes.
They were declared missing, but my dad needed to know more. So he wrote them, and this is basically the letter coming back saying that the U-boat U-869 was running low with fuel, and it was declared missing the 20th of February 45. And then it says, I had hoped that I would have had better, news for you about this. So I guess my dad always hoped, he wanted to know,
I found an unknown German U-boat off the coast of New Jersey. And me and my partners were diving, and one day we went out and we accidentally stumbled on this U-boat. So we tried for the next few years to recover items from the wreck, and we found a knife, and on the knife's handle was a name, and the name was Hornberg. And I wrote to the VOST organization in Berlin, and I requested information about this. Well, they gave us a U number based upon that, but they said it can't possibly be that U-boat because that U-boat was not ordered to New Jersey.
Don't tell me it's that one. Don't tell me that was Otto's U-boat.
We positively identified the U-boat last year by bringing out tags out of the engine room that say U-869. And I came here because I wanted to tell you that I found your brother's boat. And I'm positively...
I'm sorry.
That's right.
I mean, all these years we had thought, my father, he believed, he was there. And now he made it to the coast of New Jersey.
Yes.
Unbelievable.
60 miles offshore.
But basically nobody, they all perished.
They all perished. It's my theory, and I have backing from many naval experts, that the explosion which sank this U-boat was most likely self-inflicted. The torpedo failed and came back in a circle, and they sank. I have brought for you my report on the U-869, which documents everything that we've done for the last 7 years. And on the cover is a drawing of what...
That's how it was. That's how you found it.
That's exactly how we found it.
It's just mind-boggling. He made it all the way over to here, over to America. I'm just totally stunned. Yeah, he's close. He's actually close. That's all I can say. He's close to us. And that's a good feeling.
Out of the 57 men assigned to U-869, one was saved by a twist of fate. Just before the boat left, Herbert Kashewski was hospitalized with pneumonia and missed her departure. Like the families of 869's crew, he always believed his boat was lost off Africa, until he saw this program.
Ich habe es nicht glauben können. I couldn't believe it. I just couldn't believe it. For 55 years, I thought the boat was off Casablanca, off Morocco. Knowing it's in a different location doesn't really change anything. But since I saw this film, I have been very moved. I feel all stirred up inside. I have nightmares. It's all come back to me. The war, all we went through, all we had to endure for no reason. I think of the ones I was close to. Radioman Hornburg, Leo Platt. They were all close to me. Somehow I was safe. I don't know why. It was fate, destiny. I don't know.
For most of us, World War II exists only in photographs and moving pictures, distant in time and place. But the cost of the war is still being paid today by survivors, by relatives of those who lost their lives, by those who were only children at the time, and by some who were not even born when the storm was raging. Like U-869, the scars of the Second World War are still there, hidden beneath the surface, yet closer than we realize.
Hitler's Lost Sub lies 100 feet below the Navy's limit for recreational diving. On NOVA's website, descend to the wreck of U-869 yourself and encounter the hazards these divers are up against. At pbs.org or America Online keyword PBS. To order this show or any other NOVA program for $19.95 plus shipping and handling, call WGBH Boston Video at 1-800-255-9424.
Einstein called it his greatest blunder, but now his abandoned theory may be coming true. A mysterious force is pushing against gravity.
The universe is beginning to accelerate in its expansion.
Runaway Universe, next time on NOVA.
NOVA is a production of WGBH Boston.